So with that said, Phil, since you're on right now, let me go to the MoTrack built along, because this is your turn, I think, to finish up the O-scale model for the 4 models of the same building that we're doing on this. So I'll leave it with you, sir. And you need to turn on your speaker.
So unmute and share my screen. So let's see if we share the right screen here. So that should be a well-shared screen. So this is the O-scale version of the Motrack model of the Adamsville Depot. You know, I said this was kind of the way I took this was, rather than building the model as, you know, it came out of the package, there were really 2 characteristics I wanted. One, I wanted to build it in a way that it could be used on an O-scale narrow gauge module. Secondly, I wanted to give it more detail and change it from something you probably wouldn't put up close to the edge of your railroad to something that could be viewed at 6 to 8 to 10 inches. And kind of, I think that's a fun thing to do with virtually any model. So the first thing I want to do is hit tonight, kind of where I closed last time. I went really fast, so I thought I'd take a moment longer. So these were the walls. The walls were all pre-built and completely finished on the inside and outside, separate from the model. Makes everything a lot easier to do. They were painted with Floco Reefer yellow over some pre-weathered wood to give it a nice light thin coat. I talked about that last time. The interior was washed with a light dye, and then all the signs and things were added. So one of the things clearly on a building like this gives you a lot of kind of character is adding signs in, a combination of some commercial things that I had in the toolbox, but also some prints that were, from the internet. The whole thing, the station signs are actually printed placards on plastic strips to give them a little bit of depth versus normal signs that would have been on the side. And the whole thing then was put on the base. But before I did that, one of the things I really focused on was doing a little bit of weathering. So this is kind of my weathering setup. I've got a tub. This is a tub lid from a fairly large container I've got in my shop, rolling shop thing where my airbrush is in the garage. And it turns out I set it up so they don't really need lids. So I got a bunch of lids, and they're great work surfaces for doing all these dirty things, as you can see. But basically, this is a combination of regular chalks. These are actually some prepackaged chalks. Have used both these that came from Amazon, and these are some Rembrandts in this box. I didn't put them out. I have a grater that I bought at the dollar store, and you can grate these stick chalks into a bowl. And then I use a fairly short brush here to actually grab that chalk and put it on the model. So you can kind of see here on the floor, where in this picture, there's nothing on the floor. Over here, we begin to add some weathering inside where the foot patterns would be based on where things were inside, and then the outside. And then the walls were all weathered at the same time. The next stage was putting the walls together and assembling it. And that's actually pretty easy. It was just assembled on the corner. I decided to put it on the corner to maximize kind of the area to put things on as far as details, et cetera, on the platform. If you put it more in the middle, you get smaller areas all around. The next stage was doing the roof. The roof, nice thing about the model is it came with roof strips, strips of pre-cut, strips of paper that were cut on the laser cutter. The suggestions were to color those before you installed them. So I colored them. My one comment was I get a little impatient occasionally, and I did this more blotchy, and I think it should have been more streaky. I think it would have been better to do different colors and try to get more vertical streaking onto it. Then the stakes were glued to each roof piece separately, all the way up to the top to where the top piece would go on. Then what I did was to glue it together. I actually used the braces that were provided. Those are these 2 braces here, which are little wooden braces that were provided with the kit. But because I wanted to put the roof together before I put it on to be able to finish it I went ahead and 3D printed 2 small braces for the interior. And then what you'll notice is I put some LED lights right here. So these braces here are the 3D printed braces. These are the ones that are laser cut that came in the kit. And these are just very, very micro LEDs, and they're literally just glued in across the top with the idea of creating some lighting inside so you can see the interior. I also 3D printed these little corners out here to glue in, really just to strengthen the roof as you put it together, because that let me build it. Generally, I'd make roofs removable, but in this case, I didn't. Before I put the roof on, I put some interior details in, some printed letters here. These are all 3D printed. This is a 3D printed desk. Over here, we've got a 3D printed table along with some 3D printed chairs. And this is a Berkshire Valley potbelly stove here in the corner. It felt like you kind of had to have a stove in this. The details, turns out, when you look at building an O-scale, you can actually print things. You don't need necessarily a resin printer for a lot of these things. So these are chairs that were actually printed on the filament printer. And when you look at them inside, they work very well. Same with this. I did put together the stairway as it was built in the model. I put one of them together that way. I thought it was a really nice little set of stairs. Because I had cut the platform down to be able to use with a narrow gauge and in a narrow gauge environment, I made a second set of stairs where I cut them off and made them a little bit shorter to fit in this environment. So I've got some prepared stairs. And you can kind of see the end here of the boards and the wood a little bit that we talked about earlier. A couple other things. This is a brass tube. One of the things I found is if you just put a brass tube, scrap brass tube, through the model down to the level of the scenery, it's a great place to run your wiring. You paint it black, it really becomes invisible in the model. The other thing that I wanted to point out here was one of the real scale differences is all the other models, through the S model, use a corner block here at the edge of the walls. If you notice, when you look back here on this picture where you can see, you'll see that the corner locks here, these corner locks here of the laser cutter actually are right on the boards to the end. And because what this model had that was different is it came with this angled wood strip that you actually put on the corners. And that actually works really well. I'm actually going to buy some of that and use it on some other models because it actually is a great way of putting an edge on. I normally use, a 1x6 and a 1x8 and kind of overlap them a little bit at the corner, but this makes it really easy. The only challenge I found was cutting the angles for the roof at the top. It was really tough to keep it from splitting. So the next thing to do is just to glue the roof on. Side, because I found is once you glue the roof on, obviously you can't get back inside to do anything. I actually had another model similar to this with similar structure that I did this on, and I had a figure fall over, and you have to reach in with tweezers and try to put everything back together. I thought about trying to make this roof removable. The problem is the posts that are over here would have to have been put in place beforehand and somehow attached back to the building so the roof could sit on them. And I just decided it was just too much and too kind of spindly out there to make that work. So essentially the roof got glued on, got glued down with tapes, and then I tried testing some figures. So clearly one of the things you want when you do a station is you want to do a bunch of figures. So I did a bunch of figures, did a little bit of washing of them, make them a little bit darker, and then some dull coat. The next step was putting in the smokestack of the potbelly stove. So what I do that is you measure really exactly where the stove is on the inside, and then mark that on the roof, and then start drilling through the roof with first a very small drill and then progressively larger drills. And if you do your measuring right, and actually in this one I did, when I got through the roof, I was right on the top of the flue that came out of the stove. So then basically this was glued into place in that location. And then what I do is I keep these are these small takeout tubs that you get when you get salsa at a takeout bar. And what I've done is I put a little bit of Dr. Ben's rust in that. And when it dries out, the alcohol dries out, it just stays in there. And all you need to do is throw a little bit of alcohol in to wet it. And then you can seal around the stack of the roof. So it becomes really easy to put that rust in, and notice you rust the stack, but also rust down the roof. So the last thing then was weathering the roof, again, using chalks, a variety of chalks. One thing that if you're have not done much dry brushing, this is a special dry brushing set. There are 3 sizes of this. It's from a company called the Army Painter. It's actually from the military modelers. And I found it has these really short, stiff bristles and a circular pattern. And it works really well to do dry brushing and get some dry brushing on, especially when you can't see it very well, but when you try to get the white on to do a little bit of highlights on the model. So anyway, that basically wraps it up. A few final photos. All this is a piece of foam with actually loose dirt on it and a piece of track with a couple of sticks of goo on it. But took it outside to try to take some pictures to show once you put it on your layout, you can even take a kit like this that's a fairly simple kit and make it into a building that's quite attractive. And in O scale, being able to have a station, a depot that's this size is really important because we just don't want to spend a lot of our space on depots. And then again, in O scale, as I said at the beginning, doing the interior to me is really important. So here are some kind of shots of the interior and what the building looks like. So that's basically a wrap. And thanks everyone. And